So we're going to pick up with segment 1, which is on the U.S. governmental structure. The U.S. governmental structure. So when we think about institutions and government as an institution, remember, institutions are groups of groups that provide some type of essential function for the continuation of a society. So when we talk about the U.S. government, we're not just talking about one entity. We're talking about groups of groups that go into the creation of the U.S. governmental structure. So if we think about the different groups of groups, there are lots and lots of different governments that make up the U.S. government. And so if we're looking at the governmental structure of the United States, we're actually looking at a multitude of different governmental organizations. And we can actually even layer these. We can actually layer these into different parts or different levels. At the lowest level of the U.S. governmental structure, and by lowest I mean the closest to the population, is the city and municipal governments. City and municipal governments. In the state of Pennsylvania, there are hundreds of city and municipal governments. So when we're talking about the U.S. governmental structure, we can already see it's not just one government. It is a series of governments. So at the bottom level, we have city and municipal governments. City and municipal governments are typically in charge of providing services to its members or its residents, such as things like garbage removal, street cleaning. City and municipal governments are typically in charge of a police force, maybe an emergency management force, a fire department, or a series of fire departments. Oftentimes, city and municipal governments run utilities. In the state of Pennsylvania, two very important utilities that city and municipal governments are in charge of: sewage and water. Right? Sewage and water. They build the sewers, they maintain the sewers, they build the water supply systems and maintain those water supply and cleaning systems. Other states, I lived in Tallahassee, Florida. The electricity was run by the municipal government. It was owned by the city of Tallahassee. So different cities or municipalities will own different utilities. City and municipal governments are in charge of the local education. So the school district typically is part of a city or municipal government. In the state of Pennsylvania, we have over 500 school districts, over 500 school boards that make decisions about educational policy for each of those districts. That is part of the local city or municipal government. So you can already see we have hundreds of school districts with hundreds of school boards in the state of Pennsylvania, and we have hundreds of city and municipal governments that run these different types of services. The U.S. governmental structure, the government itself, is made up of groups that provide essential services. Provide essential services. A unique part or a unique feature of city and municipal governments is that they tend to be less ideological. They tend to be less ideological. So we find that people from different political parties will run for municipal and city governmental positions, but oftentimes the decisions that they make are not based on some broader ideology, not based on some broader political philosophy. Usually the decisions that are made in municipal and city governments are based on trying to provide that service the most effective that they possibly can. Right? So in the United States, we have two major political parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. One way to think about this is that there's really no Democratic or Republican way to remove garbage. Right? There's no Democratic or Republican way to salt the roads in the winter for the state of Pennsylvania. This is what we mean by less ideological. These city and municipal governments are typically based on providing these different types of services. And their job is to make sure that those services are provided. On top of the level of the city governments and the municipal governments, we have county level governments. So in the state of Pennsylvania, there is nearly 100 counties. And so those are 100 different governments. Nearly 100 different governments in the state of Pennsylvania along the lines of county governments. County governments also provide services. Right? They also provide services to the residents of the county. Here we sit in Indiana County. We sit in the borough of Indiana. And our county government is located within Indiana. Right up at the Indiana courthouse is where the county government is located. County governments provide broader services than the city and municipal governments. So they provide broader services. Services that are needed, but usually can be distributed amongst everyone within the county, rather than services that would be located within the municipality or within the city. So county governments provide services such as jailhouses. Right? So every municipality needs typically a police force, but not every municipality or every city needs its own jailhouse. So those services go to the county or provided by the county. County governments provide the service in terms of small parks and recreational services. So they'll provide funding to develop parks and recreation for the county. Typically counties have a fairground that they will every year provide some type of large recreational time known as the county fair. Indiana, every year at the start of the semester, or start of the fall semester, we have this big county fair right across in the fairgrounds of Mack Park that is provided by the county government. If y'all are from Butler, there's a Butler County Fair. If you're from Armstrong County, there's an Armstrong County Fair. There's even county fairs for Allegheny County. There's county fairs all the way out in the counties of the Philadelphia area as well. So county governments provide these recreational and park services that typically city or municipal governments do not provide. They provide public health services. So there's typically a county family services, county agencies for health services, for the elderly, etc. Something that the city governments or the municipal governments do not provide, but are distributed amongst all of the municipalities within that county or all of the cities within that county. They provide transport services, so the buses that you ride here in Indiana County, the Indy bus, is provided by the County Transportation Authority, right? The County Transportation Authority. And then they provide other types of welfare and health agencies that city and municipal governments do not provide as well. And if we look at city and municipal governments, they tend to be less ideological than the higher forms of government. And they also provide more opportunities for direct democracy. So it's likely if you are a resident of Indiana borough, you can attend a borough council meeting. And you can probably get on the agenda to be able to speak as a resident. And you will be able to influence and give your opinion on different types of services provided by Indiana Borough, or maybe not provided by Indiana Borough. The same is true for the county. It's likely that you can easily attend a county government. When the county commissioners meet, you can attend their commissioners meeting, and it's likely that you can get on the agenda to speak. And you can personally voice your opinion about services that are provided by the county or not provided by the county. You have more of a direct line to influencing members of municipal governments and members of county governments than you do likely at the state level or the federal level. So there's more direct democracy at the county level and the most direct democracy located at the municipal level. I'll give you a great example of this. I am a council member for the borough of Leechburg. So the town that I live in, I became a council member. How did I become a council member? I ran for an election, and the number of votes that were cast in that election were exactly 400 votes. Right, so there were 400 people that voted for the municipal election for the borough of Leechburg, and I was able to get 289 votes in favor of my election. And it was pretty easy to go out and knock on 200 doors, to shake 200 hands, and to talk to 200 different people about what my intentions were for getting on the borough council. So in terms of direct democracy, it's easy to participate in local municipal government. It's as easy as basically getting out there and saying that you want to volunteer. Every month we have a borough council meeting. And usually there's about 8 to 10 residents that attend, different residents on different days, days of the month or different times of the year. They'll come and they'll voice their opinion. And a lot of times, what they say will then almost immediately be enacted as part of the governmental policy. So people will come and say, hey, it's winter. My road hasn't been plowed often enough. Or, the borough workers aren't putting enough salt down on my road. Almost immediately, the municipal government will make an order, hey, make sure that that road is salted. Make sure that that road is plowed. Make sure that the garbage is picked up, etc. So there's a lot more of an opportunity for people to participate and to affect governmental policy at the local level. And that's true for the county governmental level as well. If you attend a county commissioners meeting, your opinion or your voice is likely going to be heard at that meeting. You can sign up and be able to state what you care about, whether it's you care about the parks, whether you care about the courts, whether you care about county services, whether you care about transportation. It's likely that your voice will be heard. And in addition to that, it's likely that you'll be able to influence county commissioners to your position. That's what we mean by direct democracy. That's what I mean by being less ideological. It's about providing those services to residents and getting the most feedback from those residents and shaping those policies and shaping those services. Aside from city and county governments, we have two other layers of government. We have state governments. Remember that there are 50 states and several territories in the United States that all have their own government. The state of Pennsylvania has a completely different government than the state of Ohio, than the state of New York, than the state of Maryland, than the state of Delaware, than the state of New Jersey, right, than the surrounding states, state of West Virginia. So there are 50 additional governments at the state level. And that is not including the territories like Puerto Rico and elsewhere. State governments provide broader services to its members and typically assist the county governments within that state. So state governments are in charge of things like educational policy. We sit today inside a university that is owned by the state. IUP is owned by the state. We are a state-owned university. So you, by virtue of sitting in this building, are actually sitting in a building that is owned by the state, learning from a professor that is an employee of the state. So it's in charge of things like educational resources. It's in charge of things like economic development, getting different counties build up economically, helping counties when they suffer economically. State governments are in charge of state emergencies. So when the governor declares a state of emergency, a state agency, the Pennsylvania Department of Emergency Management, is dispatched to deal with that emergency. Much like how municipal governments have fire departments and police departments and emergency departments, the state level has a much larger one, a much larger agency that is in charge of emergencies that are too large for a municipal or city or even county governments to deal with. State governments have their own courts and their own jails. Some people, when they commit crimes, will go to a state prison. Will go to a state prison. It is a prison that is owned and operated by the state as part of its service that it provides. State governments are in charge of protected lands. They supervise elections. So even though we have elections at all different levels of government, we live inside a democracy, those elections are run and operated by the state and follow the rules dictated by the state. Not by the federal government, but by the state government, how we hold elections. States are in charge of granting licenses. So whether it's your hunting license, your beautician's license, your license to distribute alcohol or sell alcohol, or your license to drive a truck, it is granted by the state, and it can be revoked by the state. And then finally, state governments are in charge of passing state laws, laws that apply within the context of the state. State governments are more ideological than county governments and municipal governments. So just as we see people from the Democratic Party and the Republican Party run for positions in county and municipal governments, we see people run from those parties in the state government as well. But typically, state governments vote, or people elected to state governments, vote along the lines of their political party. So they vote along or according to their lines of their political party. And there's a particular reason for that. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But state governments typically vote along the lines of their political party. And they tend to be more representative than direct democracy. So it's pretty easy for you to speak in front of your local municipal or city government. It's fairly easy for you to speak in front of your county government or reach your county commissioner during a meeting and influence them in terms of the decisions that they make. At the state level, it's much, much harder for you to speak to or in front of members of a state government. Much more difficult in comparison to the city government and the state government, or the city government and the county government. So you may be able to email your legislator, you may be able to talk on the phone with your legislator, but it's likely that you'll never be invited to sit in front of a committee and voice your opinion. Right? To sit in front of a committee and voice your opinion. And it's likely that your voice at the state level is going to be less impactful or less effective than your voice would be at the county level or the local level. This is what we mean by more representative democracy. We elect people to speak for us when it comes to governance at the state level. We have less access to speak for our own selves. Then finally is the federal government. The federal government is in charge of the broadest services, and it actually assists state governments. It gives funding and money to help out with state governments. The federal government is in charge of the military. So the state government's not in charge of military. Municipalities not in charge of the military. County governments not in charge of the military. It is the federal government that is in charge of the U.S. military. The federal government is in charge of establishing relationships with other countries. So the state may be allowed to speak with other countries. The state may be able to send envoys or ambassadors to other countries, but it's only through the permission of the U.S. federal government. And the US federal government has the final say of who goes to what country, who speaks in what country, and under what circumstances can that government speak for the country itself. So they're in charge of relationships with other countries. The federal government is in charge of printing money. That's why we don't have money that is specific to the state of Pennsylvania. Our dollar bill is good in any of the 50 states. So the federal government is in charge of printing money. They're in charge of the post office, issuing patents, maintaining interstate roads. So if you drive on I-79 or I-80 to get here, that is a road that is maintained by the federal government rather than the state government. And they're in charge of passing federal laws, laws that apply in all 50 states. State governments pass laws that apply in the state of Pennsylvania only. Federal government passes laws that apply across all 50 states. Across all 50 states. And the federal government is the most ideological. So the political parties, especially the Democratic and Republican Party, matter in terms of how people will vote. Right? How people will vote when they're elected. And in fact, the federal government is only a representative democracy. Only a representative democracy. So there is no opportunities for you beyond persuading your legislator in one direction or another to vote or to change federal laws. It is only a representative democracy. There are no direct democracy. There's no direct democracy at the federal level. Okay? So when we think about the institution of government, the reason why I went over this civics lesson with you is to remind you that we are not talking about a single government. When we talk about the U.S. government as an institution, we are talking about groups of groups. And when we think about all of the municipal governments within the United States, all of the school boards within the United States, all of the county governments within the United States, all of the state governments and the federal government, we're talking about tens of thousands of different groups. Tens of thousands of different organizations that all combine to make the U.S. government. So we're not talking about one organization or one group. We are talking about thousands, if not tens of thousands of groups when we talk about the institution of government. How many of y'all are following me? So when you hear people talk about the government, remember, or maybe even ask them, what particular aspect are you talking about? Are you talking about the municipal governments? Are you talking about county? Are you talking about state? Or are you talking about federal government? And when there's an issue or problem that you may want to go to the government to complain about or to talk about, you yourself want to think about, am I having a problem with a municipal government issue, with a county government issue, with a state government issue, or with a federal government issue? And that'll point you to who to go to, right? Who to direct your complaint to.